everyone, and welcome to the final episode of Monthly Movie Reviews.
Cats is the greatest film of 2019. This ambitious cinematic masterpiece is worthy of every film praise for years to come.
This film is trash.
This is Adam Sandler's best performance ever.
A 10 out of 10. Doing these videos is really fun, and I'm sad that the Monthly Movie Reviews are going away.
You know what? I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. I'm not fucking leaving! The show goes on!
I thought the next film I'm going to talk about was the worst film of the year so far, but that title actually goes to the film We Go In at Dawn, which is another prime example that if you're writing an action-adventure script with guns in it, you probably shouldn't film it and put it out into the world if you don't have the budget to make the locations look convincing, or if you can't afford good actors that are convincing, and most importantly, if you don't have enough money to make the gunfights look convincing and thrilling, you should probably put that script to the side and write something you can actually afford to make. I think there are like 2 planes on the poster, but I don't remember a single scene in a plane or a plane in the movie. I don't know. This movie is literally worthless. It's 85 minutes long and it's incredibly boring. And I'm giving We Go In at Dawn a 1 out of 10.
The turning is so stupid. This movie is literally what film should not be. The ending is unrewarding and so cliche. I really can't believe this movie is real. Jump scares are dumb. Twists need to make sense. Honestly, the final shot of this movie is so confusing. The final 10 minutes, high key. It makes no sense. But overall, this experience was so terrible. It literally took me 3 days to watch this film all the way through. I was so bored. This movie was a 1 out of 10. So far, the worst movie I have seen all year.
I watch bad movies all the time, but I barely feel like I've wasted my time by watching a movie. The Turning is a horror film, and for the horror to really get me, or for me to at least want to get invested in the horror, the characters have to be understandable, and the filmmaking techniques used in the movie can't be cheap or dumb. This film doesn't succeed in either of those ways. The characters in this film are so frustrating and annoying. The main character, played by Mackenzie Davis, basically does nothing the entire movie. Things happen to her, and she doesn't really do anything about it. Her character is such a passive protagonist who walks into the same situations over and over again, and at many points in the movie you wonder to yourself, okay, at this point she's gonna do something, right? And the answer is always no, which makes the movie boring and repetitive. Brooklyn Prince's character is basically a MacGuffin, and she doesn't really do anything in the movie either. Finn Wolfhard's character is easily the worst aspect of this movie. As soon as he arrives, every speck of possible enjoyment of the film is completely incinerated. He does things for the sole purpose of frustrating the audience, but there's nothing behind it. This character's motivation changes from scene to scene because the movie needs conflict. The old lady who takes care of the kids is the same exact way. This movie uses jump scares, which all suck. The nightmare scene sucked. In fact, the movie would be marginally better if none of the scary elements were in the movie. The twist at the end is basically a giant middle finger to the audience for being stupid enough to waste their time on watching this movie, and it's really upsetting, and yeah. I'm giving The Turning a 1 out of 10.
I can't even remember what The Grudge was about. Is it a prequel? A sequel? A reboot? Really? I don't even know what was going on. What I do remember though is that I gave it a nice 1 out of 10. Forgettable.
Why is this movie called The Grudge? It explains that it's in the continuity of the American remake, so isn't this technically The Grudge 1.5 or The Grudge 3 or 4? Anyway, none of these movies are good. Not even the original Japanese movie. They're all bad, but at least the original has atmosphere, even if it's lacking everywhere else. This film has nothing. It's directed by the man behind The Eyes of My Mother, which is a movie I liked a lot, but this film feels like a regression in pretty much every single way. None of the shots are worthwhile, the performances are silly at best, there is nothing exciting, new, or worth dissecting in a critical way. The jump scares are trash because jump scares are mostly trash. The new terrible design of The Grudge is basically a giant neon sign over the movie that says, "We are only here for the money," and I'm giving The Grudge a 2 out of 10.
Like a Boss is terrible. This generic chick flick checks all the boxes and is super safe for no reason. This movie high-key just exists. It doesn't say anything, it doesn't do anything new, it's just here. It's not funny, and it is actually very boring. I think the wardrobes, however, were something that was fine, and that stopped me from giving it a solid 1 out of 10. It's a nice 2 because of that. I really don't have much to hate about it, and will probably forget about it by like next week.
In many ways, Call of the Wild is not a worse movie than the movies I'm about to talk about after this, but this movie fails for me in 2 major ways. One, this movie is mostly a computer-generated affair, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but what does make it a bad thing for me is that it's unconvincing and immersion-breaking, whether it's the canine protagonist or the environments that the production couldn't afford to shoot at. The bottom line is that none of it is believable. Because of that, the second major way Call of the Wild fails for me is that it's boring. If it's not convincing and I don't believe anything on screen, I can't possibly care about anything happening, even if Harrison Ford is doing the best he can to breathe life into this movie. And it's not like you need a trained eye to spot the CGI dogs and terrible backgrounds because it's everywhere in every scene. And I'm giving Call of the Wild a 2 out of 10. Downhill is a remake of the 2014 critically acclaimed film Force Majeure from Ruben Östlund, the director of The Square, which won the Palme d'Or in 2017. You're probably wondering, wow, if the filmmaker has been successful, and both of his biggest movies have been critical hits, why would American producers remake one of his movies instead of hiring him to do a movie for them? Well, that's exactly why, because people know it. Why would producers try to find something that isn't great and try to improve upon it? I mean, that would make sense, but this is America, so we're not doing that. In this case, Force Majeure is a movie that had interesting locations and subtle blocking of the actors and a very reserved camera style and had focused, restrained performances where you do the work in trying to interpret what they're feeling instead of the script constantly throwing lines of dialogue at you explaining their feelings.
It's like got that like, oof.
Downhill takes all of those elements and either removes them or waters them down to the point where you're wondering what the 2 directors directing this movie were even going for in the first place. The camera work in this movie has no flow. It's inconsistent. It tries to be force majeure in some scenes, but for most of the movie it's trying to be one of those nothing comedies where every shot is just treated as coverage and nothing else. Julia Louis-Dreyfus is the best part of the movie, but she's not being directed well by the 2 directors directing this movie, so at times it feels like she's playing her character from Veep. Speaking of Veep, there's a character that's basically a carbon copy of the Norwegian Prime Minister character from Veep. Will Ferrell is trying, but again, the directors messed everything up. This is one of the worst adaptations I've seen of anything since Suicide Squad or Justice League, or most recently that Lion King thing from last year, and I'm giving Downhill a 2 out of 10. Can't wait for that Parasite remake, ha 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 ha. It's gonna be great.
Downhill is kind of a downer. This movie is presented as somewhat of a comedy, but after watching it you will feel somewhat depressed or upset, and not in a good way either, like Boys Don't Cry or Requiem for a Dream. In a good way? That's probably not the right way to say it, but you know what I mean. Those films are good. This is not. A 4 out of 10.
The Postcard Killings is a film adaptation of apparently a famous novel, but this movie does that book no justice because this is a predictable, boringly shot, terribly edited murder mystery with forgettable performances and an inconsistent leading performance from Jeffrey Dean Morgan. It's not his fault though. Like every other choice in the movie, it's the director's fault. This is definitely a terribly directed movie, and I'm giving The Postcard Killings a 3 out of 10. Spenser Confidential is the millionth collaboration between Mark Wahlberg and director Peter Berg, and judging by the end of this movie, it's not going to be the last, and I kind of wish it was. I didn't see Lone Survivor, but people seemed to like it. Patriots Day came and went. Deepwater Horizon was fine. Glenn said Mile 22 was trash in our 2018 August and September video, and I trust that's the case, although eventually I will find out for myself, and Spenser Confidential is just bad. It kind of felt unprofessional. Like, you can telegraph every moment of this movie as soon as you meet each character. The tone is fluctuating like an EKG monitor. Sometimes it feels like the actors are invested, but a lot of the time it feels like they're not even there. The music is abhorrent. There's a sex scene between Mark Wahlberg and
Eliza Schlesinger
in a bathroom that was pretty funny, but as soon as it's over, it turns into a different movie immediately. Even the energy of the actors is way different, and you can see all of the tone problems in the whole movie in that one scene. It's like if Todd Phillips tried to fit the scenes from the Hangover trilogy in Joker. If you want to feel like you truly wasted 2 hours of your life, I would highly recommend it. And I'm giving Spenser Confidential a 3 out of 10. The Last Thing He Wanted is the latest film by Dee Reese, the director of 2017's Mudbound, which is an okay film, but I've had no desire to revisit it. This film, on the other hand, I also do not want to revisit, but not because it was just okay, but because this film is terrible. This movie is a narrative mess. There are no characters to actually get attached to, the editing felt so choppy that it annoyed me, and above everything else, it's boring. I never want to talk about this movie ever again. It's just bad. The actors are wasted. Dee Reese, I don't know how she made a film this bad. When critics came out of Sundance, I think it was, and they were trashing it, I was thinking, there's no way it can be as bad as they're saying it is. But it is, and I hope she gives us something worthwhile next time. If there is a next time, because you know how women in Hollywood are treated. And I'm giving The Last Thing He Wanted a 3 out of 10. All the Bright Places is one of those movies where you can tell it's an adaptation of a book just by hearing the lines of dialogue, because they're so cheesy and begging to be remembered. Every scene is asking to be clipped and put on Tumblr. It's so manipulative that the second you turn 18, the movie will immediately lose its charm. Justice Smith, again, has yet to impress me, although he's trying to make a turd not smell like a turd in this movie, so it's not his fault entirely. And Elle Fanning is way too good for this movie. It's just a waste of time. It's a turd. If you want a book adaptation of a teen drama that's over the top, cartoonish, and also has a manipulative twist at the end, but it's easier to digest, I would recommend seeing Perks of Being a Wallflower instead, and it's also on Netflix, and I'm giving All the Bright Places a 3 out of 10. Guns Akimbo is a loud, nauseating, shallow, and not satisfying movie. There were many times throughout the runtime where I wondered what the appeal of this movie was. I sat there as the camera was whooshing around Daniel Radcliffe, and the sound mix was destroying my eardrums, and I pondered why this movie was made the way it was, and who would actually enjoy it. You know, things I should not be thinking about while watching a movie. Samara Weaving basically saves the movie from not being boring, but it's not enough to save the movie from being disposable, and I'm giving Guns Akimbo a 3 out of 10.
To All the Boys, P.S. I Still Love You was so goddamn boring, holy shit. This movie has literally nobody talking about it. The first movie was something to watch, but this one, oh my god, it was so unbearably boring. Laura Jean is high-key a manipulative bitch, and nobody can act. Just so boring. A 2 out of 10.
To All the Boys 2 is the second film in the To All the Boys trilogy on Netflix. I didn't really like the first one because it was a forgettable, shallow romantic comedy, and this one is no different. But it's actually kind of worse in a way. The first film had an advantage in the beginning because setting up an accessible romance film in the first act isn't exactly rocket science, but having a first act and a sequel to a romance film is a much harder puzzle to figure out, and this film doesn't stand up to the task. It had a really rough start and it was kind of boring. Not because the two leads are in a relationship and there's no conflict yet, but actually because of how they show them together is the least interesting, bland, Pinterest version of a teen relationship imaginable. It never fully recovers from the beginning because when this film has something interesting in it, it'll kill any interest by bad narration, explaining the entire thing, or the actors will be indicating too much, or some really dumb song will be playing in the background ruining any chance chance this film might have at being good. The music is used solely to carry all of the weak scenes in this movie, which for the most part are every transitional sequence in the film. It's like in mid-budget comedies where the protagonist is moving from one location to another in the first act, and it's just pans from left to right of a car going from point A to point B, with the occasional aerial shot of the city, and some inoffensive song is playing in the background. But with this movie, it's literally between every single dialogue scene. I'm sure this happens in the first movie, but I honestly don't remember because it was forgettable. Anyway, it's not the worst movie in the world. The vibrant colors and monochromatic color palette certainly make the film watchable, but it's not well done in any other way to me. Lana Condor and Netflix's attempt at Timothée Chalamet have no chemistry at all in this movie. There's a point when Ross Butler from 13 Reasons Why yells, "Linkin Park slaps," which is pretty cringy and tells you basically everything you need to know about if you should spend your time on this movie or not. And I'm giving To All the Two Boys 2 a 4 out of 10. We're not reviewing these movies anymore. They're all crummy, inadequate, lazy, rushed, and lifeless pieces of garbage. Go read the books instead until Warner Brothers Animation decides to not make 3 movies a year and to make 2D animation actually hand-drawn. And I'm giving Superman Red Son a 2 out of 10.
Superman Red Son is another DC Extended Universe movie in the line of horribly animated DC Extended Universe films. This movie could have been so good if they just cared a little about what they were presenting on screen. The animation is so gross. The story is fine, the action is fine, it's just this animation, it's so subpar. Like, holy shit, just try a little bit. I'm giving this movie a 5 out of 10.
I Still Believe is another piece of religious propaganda by the religious propaganda company who brought you I Can Only Imagine. You're probably wondering, why is this movie so far in this video? And that's because we're now at the point where religious movies like Breakthrough are catching up to mediocre movies in terms of production value, so the days of Kirk Cameron's Saving Christmas seem to be far behind us. Hopefully. But still, everything else is lacking. There are a couple of bright sparks in the beginning of the film, but that's extinguished pretty quickly, and it becomes a pretty bland version of This Is Us, the movie. The God thing holds these movies back because God is not a tangible character in any of these movies, so there's no drama there. It's not like Passion of the Christ, where he's literally the main character, like he interacts with all of the people in the movie. But in I Still Believe, he doesn't have a presence, he doesn't interact with the characters, but hey, at least the production company doesn't have to spend extra money for visual effects, am I right? Anyway, snarkiness aside, it's one of the more digestible movies because it is so cookie cutter and the God card isn't used until something super dramatic happens. I'm not saying you can't have religion as an element in your movies. Martin Scorsese has been doing it for almost 50 years and he's doing just fine. But the difference between movies like this and something like The Last Temptation of Christ or Silence is that those movies aren't trying to sell you something, and I'm giving I Still Believe a 4 out of 10. Speaking of selling things, the Milky Way product placement is easily the most unintentionally funny product placement in any movie ever. If you try to tell me that there is one funnier than this one, I'm going to tell you you're wrong, okay? This movie felt a lot like Captain Marvel, where you watch all of the action scenes and just by watching it once, you can tell which ones were handled by the director and which ones were handled by the visual effects team. And when you notice that, it really pulls you out of a movie that was kind of disposable in the first place. It also reminded me a lot of Gemini Man, like, didn't we do this already last year? And I'm giving Bloodshot a 3 out of 10.
Bloodshot was fucking insane. Yet another insane balls-to-the-wall action film with nothing really worthwhile, except the action sequences. The concept is really interesting, but honestly, this movie could have been done a little better. Characters and situations are written so poorly that it makes you question if the people involved actually cared, but it is nothing too wild. It's a 5 out of 10. The rhythm section is here and stars Blake Lively as a prostitute spy lady, and I just could not get into this movie at all. Who is it for? This movie is boring as hell, but does present some nice practical action sequences and nice performances overall. It really is forgettable, and if you watch it you'll probably be like, okay, I guess. I'm giving the rhythm section a 4 out of 10. Mewtwo Strikes Back again is honestly so gross to look at. Nothing compares to the hand-drawn animation of the original. The dubbing for this film is also atrocious, but it has all the same moral lessons as the original, so I guess it has to be at least a 5 out of 10. But like, you really don't have to watch this film. It was low-key a waste of time.
Human Capital is a movie about the importance of having sidewalks in suburban neighborhoods, and that's basically it. This movie doesn't do anything exciting or new. Seeing Marissa Tomei in a movie where she's not being wasted like in every Marvel movie she's been in over the past 4 years was nice, but that's basically it. And I'm giving Human Capital a 5 out of 10.
The photograph is here, and it is here to tell you about a story that you will forget as soon as you leave the theater. It is fine. The camera work, ironically, is okay, the performances are nice, and the end is satisfying enough. A nice little date movie if you want to watch it with a significant other. A 5 out of 10.
The Photograph is the latest film by Stella Meggy, the director of Everything Everything, which was not great. This movie is better, even if it has the same problems Everything Everything had. But the main problem is that its story beats are cookie cutter, repetitive, predictable, and not very compelling. This movie begins with archival footage of a character in the movie, and she basically spells out what the movie is about, which is also what the trailer did. And while that clip was playing, I rolled my eyes for a sec, but then I thought, well, if they're pushing their message this hard, maybe the rest of the movie will provide more insight or something deeper that we haven't seen yet from a romance between workaholics. Or maybe it'll subvert our expectations or something, but like, it didn't. I didn't get the sense that I was seeing a greater insight into these kinds of relationships, and it just felt like the movie was running through the motions on autopilot. As I was watching the movie, I was thinking, oh, I can totally relate to that, but it was never anything more than that. The jazz-inspired music did a great job at creating atmosphere, especially since both characters are involved in the arts. It's no Beale Street, but it's pretty good. Issa Rae and Lakeith Stanfield are serviceable in their roles, but the story and the way it's presented doesn't give them the opportunity to give us something out of this world. I also enjoyed the usage of the blue and brown color palette. Since all of the actors have brown skin, the brown costumes and environments created some nice monochromatic images. And blue is a color that goes with pretty much everything, especially brown. Previously on this channel, I've complained that some cinematographers don't know how to light people with dark skin. It often feels like whenever most DPs are lighting them, they said, okay, let's just blast as much light as possible at their faces and just leave it there. It's okay. We won't put any more work into shaping the light. It's fine. This, for the most part, is not the case with The Photograph, thankfully. And that's really all the nice things I have to say about this movie. And I'm giving The Photograph a 5 out of 10. Escape from Pretoria is about the escape from Pretoria, and it was alright. I didn't hate it, I didn't love it. There's a scene at night with gum and a stick. You'll know it when you see it. That's pretty awesome, but that's it. I learned something new about the apartheid movement that I didn't know before. Daniel Radcliffe gives a serviceable performance and gives the film the urgency it needs, but I haven't thought about this movie since, and I don't think I will. There's literally nothing extraordinary to say about this movie, and there's nothing particularly terrible about it either. I was entertained for the most part, but it doesn't really do anything that Shawshank Redemption or Escape from Alcatraz didn't do better. And I'm giving Escape from Pretoria a 5 out of 10.
Gretel Hansel is actually really okay. It was definitely shot with a camera, and everyone acted their butts off. Was it scary though? Not really. It felt a little more claustrophobic than scary. I really was a fan of the set design throughout the entire film, and thought that should be recognized. Anyway, it's a slow movie that you probably need to watch alone. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10.
The Banker is a very entertaining movie about banking. I know, right? Well, it's more than that, but I'll let you figure that out for yourself. It's an Apple TV Plus exclusive, and it stars Anthony Mackie, Samuel L. Jackson, and Nicholas Hoult. The first half of this film is extremely entertaining, and then the second half happens, and it kind of deflated my enjoyment of the movie, which I can't entirely blame on the writer and director because it's based on a true story, but I don't know. When the second half of these types of movies happen, I begin to lose interest because they all come together in a very similar way. It was my biggest criticism about the winner of the Palme d'Or from 2018, Shoplifters, and this film doesn't escape that criticism either. But again, the first half is really fun, and it made me smile, and definitely carried me through the second half, which I didn't enjoy as much, and I'm giving The Banker a 5 out of 10. The Hunt was supposed to come out a year ago, but got canceled because of bad timing with a real-life event, and a retweet from the annoying Orange, and here we are. But honestly, this movie is not that controversial. It's just shallow. It's very aware of the political discourse, but that's not enough to elevate this movie, to have some sort of deep social commentary to think about well after the movie is over. Betty Gilpin gives a wonderfully bizarre performance in a movie that definitely could have done a better job at exploiting the faults in Democrats and Republicans, and I'm giving The Hunt a 5 out of 10.
The Hunt is really not controversial at all. It gives a very extreme version of the far left and the far right, but it is nothing people can't handle. Advertisements for this film portrayed it as the most controversial film of all time, and it's just not that. I was a fan of the first act and how it kept switching protagonists until we finally got to The commentary was nothing too crazy. It didn't really keep you guessing or keep you on your toes. This is another film that just exists, but it is fine. A 5 out of 10.
Onward is the 22nd Pixar film. It's directed by Dan Scanlon, whose last film, Monsters University, actually wasn't the worst thing in the world. It was pretty okay. Onward, however, is a painfully average, run-of-the-mill Pixar movie, which is better than most movies, which is why it's so high up on this video for me. At this point, it feels like we're retreading so much familiar territory for Pixar here, and the way this film is structured feels like it was made by a factory. There's nothing particularly awful about it, but this movie doesn't do anything extraordinary either. I saw this a month ago and I've barely thought about it. I've thought more about the two mice who scurried past my aisle in the empty theater I was in pre-lockdown more than I've thought about this movie. So that basically tells you everything you need to know. And I'm giving Onward a 5 out of 10.
Onward is the newest Disney Pixar extravaganza, and it's fine. The animation is nothing spectacular, and the entire film is kind of just your run-of-the-mill buddy adventure movie until about the third act. The third act was actually quite heartfelt and somewhat worthwhile. Like most Pixar films, it hit me right in the feels. I was a fan. Probably a nice movie to watch with 5 and under kids. For real. But I'm giving it a 6 out of 10.
Bad Boys for Life is the third film in the Bad Boys series, and it's not directed by Michael Bay. I guess he was busy directing Six Underground, but honestly, he picked the wrong movie to make. His first two Bad Boys movies were in rotation in my house when I was growing up, so in a way, I grew up on some pretty fire schlock, but I haven't really seen them since I was a kid. I rewatched both films the night before I saw this new movie, and Bad Boys is fine. It's Michael Bay's first movie, so at this point, he's still busy copying Ridley Scott, Tony Scott, and David Fincher, and it doesn't really feel like what we now know as a Michael Bay movie. Will Smith and Martin Lawrence don't really have amazing chemistry in this movie, and it feels like Will Smith is desperately trying to be a movie star, but he's not there yet. Bad Boys 2, on the other hand, is a completely different story. This is probably Michael Bay's magnum opus, if you could even say such a thing. This film has some of Bay's best shots. Like, if you were to do a top 10 best Michael Bay shots list, at least 7 spots will be dedicated to Bad Boys 2. Will Smith is a full-on movie star in this film. Martin Lawrence has not been funnier before or since this movie, and when this movie is not being blatantly homophobic or spending way too much time on arbitrary moments of a shootout scene, it's a great time. The overdose scene in the club is pretty awesome, the morgue scene is hilarious, and the Martin Lawrence ecstasy sequence rides the line well enough that you don't feel icky for laughing at it. Guys, I'm not bullshitting, this movie is a very flawed, great time. Bad Boys for Life, on the other hand, is kind of unspecial all around. You know how Michael Bay's movies look like commercials, but at least they're kind of pretty? Well, this movie looks like a music video, and a pretty generic one at that. Adil and Bilal, the directors of this film, try their best to do their own thing, while also making you feel like you're watching a Bad Boys movie, but it's not enough, to be honest. I will give them credit for making a colorful movie though, because most generic looking movies put no thought into color, so they get points for that, I guess, but again, it's the music video inspiration, because I'm pretty sure they're music video directors and it looks like it. This movie comes together in a way that's very inconsistent. There are moments that might shock you, and then there are other moments that try to shock you, but they're either underwhelming or very predictable. That also goes for most of the action sequences in the film, especially the final one. Oh my god, there's a helicopter crashing and fire and blah blah blah, and it just doesn't look good. As far as Will Smith and Martin Lawrence go, they're both fine in the movie. The problem for me is that most of the movie is about developing Will Smith's character, but he's dealing with the same issues he's dealt with for the last two films. When they are confronted with a new kind of conflict, the idea of accepting their age, it's not given any real weight at all, and it's really confusing. The commitment issues and family thing is given a lot of dramatic attention, but we're not given anything deep or thought-provoking. And you might be thinking, why are you expecting anything deep or thought-provoking from a Bad Boys movie? But they attempted to make something deep and thought-provoking, and nothing deep and thought-provoking happened. That's why. On the other hand, dealing with old age is given zero dramatic attention, even though this is an action movie, and old age being a factor could give a lot of dramatic weight to the action and add stakes, but the movie doesn't care to think deeply enough about the questions that it asks of its audience. These 50-year-old men are just as athletically capable as the 20-year-olds in this movie, and that's distracting. And I'm giving it a 5 out of 10.
Bad Boys for Life is kind of really dumb, but also super fun. Most of the jokes don't land in the slightest, and a lot of the performances are downright terrible, but the nauseating action sequences are quite entertaining. I don't think Martin Lawrence should be in any more films after this, but considering this movie made all the money, I just know we're going to see him return in Bad Boys 4. What a wasted opportunity. They could have called Bad Boys 4 Bad Boys 4 Life. And this one's something with a 3 in the title. Anyway, I'm giving Bad Boys for Life a nice 6 out of 10. Dumb entertainment that was worth seeing on the big screen literally twice.
Vivarium wasn't bad. It's a psychological drama that takes place in mostly one location, and it stars Imogen Poots and Jesse Eisenberg. There's a couple of things I probably would have changed about it though. In this neighborhood, every house is the same, and the CGI isn't the greatest, but it adds a feeling of unease to the experience, and I wish that the film was shot in deep focus to emphasize that feeling instead of trying to hide the CGI through shallow focus. You know, kind of like how Speed Racer did, but in a different context. Also, this movie takes place in the United Kingdom, but there are many visual aesthetic elements that to me felt specifically American. I'm sure it carries over in the UK as well, but that crossed my mind a couple of times. Also, by the 1 hour mark, it feels like the movie kind of ran out of ideas before it actually gets to the part that it wants to get to at the end, and because of that, it becomes a chore and I got pretty bored. But the ideas it does have are thought-provoking. It's no Parasite or Portrait of a Lady on Fire, but it's pretty good, and I'm giving Vivarium a 6 out of 10. The Gentleman is the latest film from Guy Ritchie, the director of Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which are pretty great movies. His most recent output has been appalling in King Arthur and that 2019 Aladdin remake. In The Gentleman, he's skating over familiar territory, so this movie feels like a return to form in a way. But it's not as great as those other movies. Its self-awareness is kind of annoying. It doesn't have an amazing visual presentation, but its characters and performances are where the movie really shines. Charlie Hunnam is serviceable until that one scene in the apartment that he's great in. Colin Farrell and Hugh Grant get to do some neat character work as well, and they're the highlights of the film, and overall it's a pretty okay time. I would recommend it if you're interested, but if you haven't seen Snatch or Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels yet, I would recommend you watch those films instead, and I'm giving The Gentleman a 6 out of 10. Emma is the remake of the million adaptations of Jane Austen's book, Emma. This movie is well shot, vibrant and colorful, and it's pretty hilarious until it isn't. I haven't read the book, so I don't know what the tone is in the book, but this movie takes a very lighthearted approach until the second act turning point before the third act, like comedies always do, and I really hate it when movies do that. What is so wrong about committing to the tone? You can have stakes and still be lighthearted, it can still be funny. watch Black Dynamite, it does that in spades. Harold and Maude has very sad moments in the movie, but it earns that because it doesn't pretend to be a fluffy movie before it stops being funny. Anyway, it's got really great performances, the first hour is very strong, and maybe the end won't annoy you like it annoyed me, but I still would recommend that you check it out, and I'm giving Emma a 6 out of 10.
The Way Back ironically stars alcoholic Ben Affleck as he coaches a basketball team and try to overcome the demon of addiction and depression. This movie was actually really good. I thought Affleck's performance was really great, and the story was kind of sad and heartfelt. I liked how we got to see his decline and how things don't always turn out how you want them to, but towards the end of the film, I felt like they could have done more. It did not feel fulfilling, and I think it needed to just be a little longer. We didn't really get to learn much about the team he was coaching that much. It kind of gave me the opposite vibes of Coach Carter, whereas in that film, we learned about the coach and the team, while in this film, we learned mostly about Ben Affleck. Sure, it was his story, but it would have been nice to see how things went with the team after situations take place. Whatever, maybe we'll get it in The Way Back too. I'm giving it a 6 out of 10.
The Way Back is the latest film by Gavin O'Connor, the director of Warrior, The Accountant, and Miracle. Ben Affleck turns in one of his best performances in a movie that for the most part you can see coming from a mile away, and the trailer didn't help much either. Ben Affleck turning in a good performance is not a shock, knowing his connection to the material, but also he turns in good performances on movies where the writing is abysmal, like in Batman vs. Superman. So the sky's the limit when he actually has something to work with. The final 30 minutes really helped this movie stand out against its contemporaries. It does a good job highlighting that accountability is necessary, but there needs to be a way back. No pun intended. It's not a movie that holds your hand or assures you that everything is going to be completely okay for all the characters, which in this case is completely okay. The Way Back is a pretty emotional movie, but it's not as nearly as impactful as O'Connor's previous film Warrior, and I'm giving The Way Back a 6 out of 10. Miss Americana is the Netflix Taylor Swift documentary, and it was actually pretty good. It starts off with an overview of her career, which felt like it was dragging the movie down, but in the back of my mind I was thinking, oh, they're gonna get to the Kanye moment, right? And from that moment forward, you get a true understanding of her life for the last 10 years. There are some moments where she exposes herself, but not enough in a way that it feels exploitative or like we're seeing everything, because she does make a point that with all the fame that she has, that she does want to maintain that distance and she does want her private life to be private, but nonetheless, this documentary feels like a decade of frustration and anxiety being lifted off her shoulders, and I'm giving Miss Americana a 7 out of 10. Big Time Adolescence is a coming-of-age movie on Hulu starring Pete Davidson, and it was actually pretty good. It does the thing like I mentioned in Emma where it's funny until it isn't, which is kind of annoying, but in this movie, there is always this depressing cloud hanging over the movie leading up to that point. Even with that in mind, this movie is hysterical. It blends many styles of comedy throughout, which I enjoyed a lot. In some scenes, there is definitely that improv thing happening, but then there'll be harsh cuts to emphasize a joke or to make a joke, and it's great. Pete Davidson is kind of playing a version of himself in this movie, but there are many points in this movie where he completely transcends that, and it's kind of great. John Cryer, Griffin Gluck, what a name, and Machine Gun Kelly are also very good in it. I almost forgot to see this movie because it was barely promoted, but I'm glad I remembered to see it, and I'm giving Big Time Adolescence a 7 out of 10. The Invisible Man is the latest film from Leigh Whannell, the director of Upgrade, which I thought wasn't that great of a movie, but The Invisible Man is a dramatic improvement. This reimagining of The Invisible Man after the failure of the Dark Universe is pretty awesome. I love the fact that the visual aesthetic and the way the camera movement mirrors the abusive, controlling nature of the antagonist. I love that the clean, orderly production design wasn't annoying, because in a lot of movies about people who are neat or rich people, The clean, orderly thing can kind of be unimaginative, or it's just not done in a thoughtful enough way, whereas this film does enough to stand out. There are elements of this film that are kind of predictable, kind of make no sense, but for the most part, I do like the explanation of the invisibleness, and I liked where the film went. Elizabeth Moss, our Scientology queen, knocks it out of the park again. There are many moments in this film that are genuinely shocking. The jump scares are actually good and story motivated, and it's really involving. So much so that the audience in my theater was cheering like it was Avengers Endgame or something. The only real problem I have with this movie is the score. It's so overwhelming and cheesy and odd. During the action scenes, the film felt like it was being scored by Skrillex or deadmau5 or some EDM DJ guy. There'd be moments where it's building and building like it's about to drop the bass, and it often took me out of the movie. The combination of that and the fact that the characters are fighting someone invisible often felt silly, especially on a second watch. Like, it's way more transparent on a second watch. But other than that, it's a great time, and I would recommend you see it at least once, and I'm giving The Invisible Man a 7 out of 10.
The Invisible Man is that movie. I literally saw this movie 3 times when it was in theaters. Scientologist Elizabeth Moss gives a fantastic performance of a woman tormented by her invisible abusive boyfriend. I really enjoyed most aspects of this film, like its shock value and how it is used to actually progress story elements. Really nice. The movie is suspenseful, and I think it's worth a nice rent while you're at home in quarantine. I'm giving The Invisible Man a 7 out of 10.
Crip Camp is a Netflix documentary executive produced by Barack and Michelle Obama, and by its title, it's very misleading because it's not about the Crips. It's about a group of disabled people who found refuge and belonging at a summer camp in upstate New York and their journey as adults to change the country in the 1970s. This is a very uplifting, sad, and often funny movie. The amount of archival footage they have from when they were younger is amazing and adds so much to the experience instead of just sitting through 95 minutes of interviews. There are so many characters to get attached to, and I think especially at this time in our history, whether you're upset about who's in charge of the government, or you're upset about the current state of planet Earth, or the fact that we can't leave our houses, I think this movie will make you forget about all that for just a minute and give you hope that you probably need. This movie is a tear fest for sure, and it's currently my favorite movie of the year, and I'm giving Crip Camp a 7 out of 10. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you agree or disagree, tell us in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share with your friends. Do all the things. The Matrix video is coming soon. I swear. I swear. I swear. I swear. I swear. It's coming, okay? Bye-bye.